39 minutes past the hour. Joining us again on the Sunrise Morning Show is Richard Ghazal, Senior Advisor to In Defense of Christians. Richard, welcome back.
Good morning, Andy. How are you?
I am doing just fine, thank you, and happy to have you back. You know, IDC has had a weekly segment with us on the Sunrise Morning Show for quite a few months now, and there are a few locations around the world I've noticed that we follow quite a bit. So we're going to get kind of a whirlwind update on some of them. And first off, Lebanon, which has been in a dire situation, I mean, even prior to this, but especially since that explosion in Beirut back in August. What is the latest there?
Well, just this past weekend, Annie, Cardinal Rai, who is the patriarch of the Maronite Catholic Church, he met with Pope Francis in the Vatican, where he updated the pontiff on the dire humanitarian need in Lebanon, particularly as it affects the Christians in Beirut and all throughout Lebanon. The Pope was briefed on the bitter economic crisis, as well as the endemic government corruption and the humanitarian fallout following the catastrophic explosion that you just mentioned in the Christian part of East Beirut in August. So the sad fact here is that nearly half of the Lebanese population is currently driven below the poverty line, which is absolutely staggering. It's left hundreds of thousands of Lebanese Christians hungry and homeless, which is causing a mass exodus of Christians to immigrate west. And this is especially troubling because Lebanon is the last free bastion of Christianity in the Middle East. So if the Christians of Lebanon leave, the Lebanese model of religious pluralism is effectively gone too. So this is really critical. But the meeting between the Pope and the Cardinal, however, wasn't all grim. The Cardinal actually took the opportunity to brief the Pope also on some of the charitable work being done by Lebanese Christians, which is totally independent from the government itself, that essentially is aimed at meeting the needs of those suffering.
Yeah, and there is still so much suffering. I mean, we're about 4 months on, and the news cycle has turned over who knows how many times, but you look at pictures of Lebanon today, and you know that they still need so much more support than they're getting right now. So we will continue to keep that in our prayers. Also, one of the countries to watch in terms of bad actors against Christians is Turkey, and they've been acting in both Armenia and Syria, correct?
That's absolutely correct. As you already know, their hands are in many different conflicts in the region. You mentioned that they are indeed involved in a meaningful way in the Azerbaijani assault on Armenian Christians for the last month and a half. They're also behind the ongoing assault on Christian communities in northeast Syria. Focusing first just a moment on Armenia, on the 9th of November, the Turkish and Azerbaijani assault on Armenia finally came to an end. Of course, this is a good thing because as Christians, peace is always the goal. However, in this case, aside from the idea of peace, the treaty itself was a tragic loss for the Christians of the South Caucasus. The Armenian ceasefire with Azerbaijan effectively redrew the border lines, handing historic Christian territory to Azerbaijan. The Armenian Christians who dared stay behind in their ancestral homelands have become the target of brutal violence by Turkish and Azerbaijani troops, even after the adoption of the peace treaty. So really, the Armenian Christians are effectively being forced to evacuate lands they've literally occupied and has been their homeland for centuries, which also requires them to abandon their homes and churches, which, by the way, are some of the oldest churches in all Christianity. So not only has this really cemented Azerbaijan's territorial claim, but like you mentioned, it's also emboldened Turkey's regional posture, which really in the long term is a far more menacing prospect.
And so tell us what's happening in Syria as well. I mean, talk about ancient Christianity. It's Antioch, where Christians were first called Christians.
Absolutely, yeah, that's a great point. Turkey's been steadily expanding its occupation in northern Syria every year, pretty much since 2016. It's only getting worse, and this matters because, like you just said, they're destroying a nearly 2,000-year-old Christian community in northern Syria. Turkey also seeks to destroy a budding democracy that we witness forming. And just to provide a little historical context, following the defeat of ISIS, the natives of northern Syria, which includes the Syriac Christians, have established an autonomous government which, for the last 5 years, has safeguarded ethnic pluralism, religious freedom, even gender equality. and Turkey feels threatened by this democracy budding at its doorstep, which to me is mind-boggling. So they've taken steps to destroy it. In October of 2019, the U.S. brokered a ceasefire with Turkey. Turkey, in the process of putting together that ceasefire, basically made a pledge to the United States that they wouldn't harm any civilians in northeast Syria. But just a year later, here we are. Turkey has violated the ceasefire nearly 1,000 times. They're currently bombing the final remaining Christian villages and towns in northern Syria and flooding the area with jihadists. It's interesting because it's almost impossible to distinguish Turkey's actions today from the actions of ISIS just a few years ago. And this is a NATO ally we're talking about, so it's really terrible.
Oh, man. It is really terrible. But in the interest of time, we'll need to move on to tell us what's the latest in Egypt. We've been hearing a lot about Egypt lately.
Yeah, certainly. The Copts in Egypt continue to face increasing violence from both their Muslim neighbors as well as unjust treatment from the Egyptian government itself. The Coptic Christians are essentially third-class citizens in Egypt. Just last week, the Copts in the Armenia province, which is the province in Egypt with the highest concentration of Christians, was targeted by a violent mob of Muslim villagers, firebombing Christian homes, businesses, churches. And this is just one recent example of the pervasive attacks against Christians in Egypt. But what's worse is the fact that there's no real government protection for these threatened Christians. There's no legal response for such attacks. And this has created really a culture of impunity in Egypt, where they're essentially sending a message that, do what you want to the Coptic Christians and there will be no consequences whatsoever. As of recent, the Egyptian government itself has also jailed human rights activists. Just this last week, three human rights activists were jailed. And this is the one-year anniversary, I'll also add, of the detention of Rami Kamal, who, as far as we know, no formal charges have even been brought. He's just sitting in a jail cell in Egypt.
Wow. I mean, and all of these things are being constantly followed by In Defense of Christians. If you go to indefenseofchristians.org, you can get more information. And Richard, before I let you go, I know today is Giving Tuesday. So would you like to make an appeal to listeners to support the work of IDC?
Absolutely. I thank you for that opportunity, Annie. So IDC Continued Advocacy is relying completely on the generosity of our supporters. So it's a great opportunity for our fellow Christians to search in their hearts and support the critical work of IDC. You can visit www.indefenseofchristians.org and make a donation. Today is Giving Tuesday, like you said, and all donations are tax deductible because we are a nonprofit charity.
And a very important nonprofit charity, in my opinion, at least, Richard. We've been talking to Richard Ghazal. You'll find In Defense of Christians linked at sunrisemorningshow.com.